David Olivia Garcia is a co-host of New Mexico in Focus and is also the managing editor for the New Mexico Independent, which is an online news site. He says that the internet has some great benefits for journalism. The internet is this new, amazing medium. Not so new, it's been around quite some time now. But it's maturing as, among other things, a place for journalism. In a sense, the internet allows you to tell stories better than in a newspaper or on television. For this reason, you can do it all online. You can have the written word. You can have still photographs. You can have video. You can link and kind of connect to the other journalism that has been done on a given topic. So it's not like you're in a vacuum. The internet has had a negative impact on these papers. However, John Fleck, who is a columnist for the Albuquerque Journal and also has his own blog, says that he doesn't think that's entirely the case. It really makes me more efficient as a journalist in terms of information gathering, confirmation, helping me get the background necessary to write a story. So it's really good for that. During this period of time, there was a huge surge of activism taking place to reverse this discrimination and injustice. Activists worked together and used nonviolent protest and specific acts of targeted civil disobedience, such as the Montgomery bus boycott and the Greensboro-Woolworth sit-ins, in order to bring about change. Much of this organizing and activism took place in the southern part of the United States. However, people from all over the country, of all races and religions, joined activists to proclaim their support and commitment to freedom and equality. For example, on August 28, 1963, 250,000 Americans came to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. They came to have their voices heard and listen to speeches by many civil rights leaders, especially Martin Luther King Jr., who delivered what would become one of the most influential speeches in history. In the aftermath of World War II, African American civil rights efforts were hampered by ideological splits. The Southern system of white supremacy was accompanied by the expansion of European and American imperial control over non-white people in Africa and Asia, as well as in island countries of the Pacific and Caribbean regions. Like African Americans, most non-white people throughout the world were colonized or economically exploited and denied basic rights, such as the right to vote. Researchers report that women find a man they see with an attractive woman more desirable than unattached men. That's according to a study in the journal Evolutionary Psychology. Researchers had two groups of female college students rate photos of men, all of whom had first been rated as being average attractiveness. The first group of 148 women was shown pictures of those men with an attractive female. The subjects were told that the women in the photos were either a girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, cousin or adopted sister. And the subjects rated the men with the girlfriends as more desirable than the men shown with partners described as being exes or relatives. The second study group of 97 students were shown average-looking men with an attractive woman who was described as definitely a girlfriend. And again the women rated the men with the good-looking gals as more desirable than the single guys. Plus, the attached men were thought more likely to be more intelligent, trustworthy, humorous, wealthy and attentive. Two decades ago, Kashmiri houseboat owners rubbed their hands every spring at the prospect of the annual influx of tourists from May to October. The hyacinth-choked waters of Dal Lake saw flotillas of vividly painted shikaras carrying Indian families, boho Westerners, young travelers and wide-eyed Japanese. Carpet sellers honed their skills, as did purveyors of anything remotely embroidered, while the houseboats initiated by the British Raj provided unusual accommodation. Then, in 1989, separatist ANC Islamist militancy attacked and everything changed. Hindus and countless Kashmiri businesspeople bolted, at least 35,000 people were killed in a decade, the lake stagnated, and the houseboats rotted. Any foreigners venturing there risked their lives, proved in 1995 when 5 young Europeans were kidnapped and murdered. So between 4000 and 3000 BC the Mesopotamian Sumerian cultures do not practice any kind of burial. And then, about 3000 in the early dynastic period, these burials start to reappear, and they reappear with a certain amount of conspicuous consumption, and this is the context for the royal burials at yore. Okay, so, the royal cemetery consists of quite a number of pits, so these are the excavation workers who are coming down into the pits. So you get some sense of how really deep and how really difficult it was to construct these chambers. Green chemistry is a concept designed to develop technologies which allow chemistry to be practiced with minimal damage to the environment or in an environmentally compatible way. And it's meant to cover both chemical processes and chemical products. The center, if you would, set up about 7 or 8 years ago, and the idea was to provide a hub of activities that covered fundamental research work, industrial collaboration, but also educational developments. So we work with schools and on public projects as well, and also networking. So we network out to well over 1,000 people around the globe.
Let's imagine a college student being late for class. New J, who's her current teacher, learned about nonviolent communication and knows that it begins with a clear observation. During observation he tries noticing concrete facts, things that happen at that very moment. New J jots down that N arrived 20 minutes late and that his pulse is up. Possibly a sign of stress. When focusing on his feelings, New J connects with his heart and can learn to understand various underlying emotions. This is important because what seems to be anger might in fact be sadness. During this step it is essential to distinguish feelings from thoughts. After class, New J shares his observation and explains to Anne that he feels disrespected when someone is late for his class. Knowing his needs is important because it allows him to enrich his life and feel at peace. If we disregard our needs or don't live up to our values, we experience stress and frustration. New J tells Anne that they should find a way to respect each other's values and desires. Lastly, there is the request which clarifies what future New J wants for himself and this relationship. Clear requests are hence crucial to a transformative communication. When we ask for concrete actions, we often find creative ways to ensure that everyone's needs are met. New J asks Anne not to come to class at all, if she happens to run later more than 1 minute.
There's growing alarm over plunging insect populations with climate change, habitat destruction and pesticides all thought to play a role. But now, scientists say there's another culprit: artificial streetlights. Researchers from the charity Butterfly Conservation counted caterpillars at the sides of brightly lit roads. Compared with similar stretches of unlit roads, caterpillar numbers were reduced by half, suggesting streetlights can affect the abundance of insect at least on a local scale. The scientists say with insects in trouble, we should be doing all we can to reduce negative influences. But there are practical solutions such as dimming street lights in the early hours, installing motion sensors, or using color filters to modify the light. Nature's instruments for survival can be a godsend until they begin to affect us in destructive ways. Someone's negative characteristics can cloud their favorable traits to such an extent that we cannot see the positive anymore. In our biased minds, this person has become purely evil. It's pretty difficult not to feel repulsed by someone who doesn't have any positive traits, let alone forgive them. So, we might want to look beyond the vast specter of negativity and see that the people we resent are also carrying good within them and that it's human to possess both evil and a mild form of hallucination is known as a disturbance and can occur in most of the senses above. These may be things like seeing movement in peripheral vision or hearing faint noises and/or voices. Auditory hallucinations are very common in schizophrenia. They may be benevolent, telling the subject good things about themselves, or malicious, cursing the subject, etc. Auditory hallucinations of the malicious type are frequently heard, for example, people talking about the subject behind her back. Like auditory hallucinations, the source of the visual counterpart can also be behind the subject's back. Their visual counterpart is the feeling of being looked or stared at, usually with malicious intent. Frequently, auditory hallucinations and their visual counterpart are experienced by the subject together. Take the coffee industry. The figures are roughly these. The coffee market in the world is worth about 60 billion. The growers get 5.5 billion. 10 years ago, the market was about 30 billion and the growers got a third of that. What has happened? What has happened is that well-meaning people, Americans, Germans, Europeans, decided that they would help Vietnam. And so they created a coffee industry there, which is now the second biggest producer in the world. This has serious effects on other countries like Colombia that depend on coffee exports. Heritage is what the present chooses to make of the past. That means that heritage is dynamic. It's a changing concept. And it also means that it tends to be defined in opposition to much that is going on in the present. It's endangered. Where there is heritage, there is often a sense of threat, whether it's a building that's about to be bulldozed or a way of life that is dying out because of economic change. The heritage that we speak about in this country in terms of conservation tends to be a term that becomes very central or more central in new ways as the state becomes involved in this field of administering conservation. Physics is a detailed study of matter and energy. A regional assembly was moved to devolution of power. The residence hall is closed prior to the academic building closing time at the end of the semester.